5432. 5432. I need to put on. Oh, okay. To hear myself. Oh boy. 5432. 5432. No, it's still not working yet. Is it working for you guys? Oh, okay. So it's. Is that okay? Okay, great. All right. So organizers have suggested that we all go ahead and get started. That's obviously because we are like 15 minutes late. So to the extent that you allow, we can all go ahead and get started. Would that be okay for me to invite perhaps well, first and foremost, I understand that this event is also live streamed. Is that correct? Right. So that's one of the reasons why we have to start on time. And I think it's also because there's several other events that are coming after. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to the WWF pavilion here at COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. It's such a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you. We are not a lot of us, but again, it's a great conversation to have. And so we want to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is an important conversation, you'd have to put it that way, isn't it? So shall I suggest that for those who are in the room, feel free to move to the front so that, perhaps, we can actually enjoy this conversation. Let's make it cozy. Let's not make it too formal. I know it's also formal, but to the extent possible, let's structure it in a way that we can just all have sort of, a fireside chat. I know it's a panel. So to the extent possible, please move to the front so that we can all get started. So again, a warm welcome. I think we are all starting this panel this morning, perhaps with some good news, not necessarily happening here in Baku, but far away in Brazil. As you might all be aware, there's also a G20 summit that's holding out there, and climate is on top of the agenda. At least if we are to believe media reports, what we are understanding this morning is that at least there is some consensus that's building around the fact that there should be a greater ambition on the finance side as far as climate funding is concerned. And that's good news. However, I think we still have a lot of progress to go, 1 week to the end of this COP. And so it's important that young networks like yours continue to push, and every other actor at COP continues to push in a way that by the time we all leave here next Friday, we would have at least achieved some ambitious targets on the finance side. And so this event is organized by WWF for us to be able to discuss something very specific. This is mostly about youth networks on the African continent working in the adaptation and nature-based solution space. There are a few of them that have been brought in, and the overall intention here is for them to be able to share the work that they're doing in their different countries, at least in a way that allows us to be able to properly understand what they're doing. I think that's important. Share the lessons, the challenges that they're all facing. That's going to be part of the conversation. I'm going to have a moment for me to introduce the panelists. We also had on the program at least someone who was going to speak as a keynote. We don't have him yet, but that does not stop us from moving forward with the overall conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, to the extent that you would allow, shall I welcome now maybe the panelists that we have with us this morning so that we can all go ahead and get started with such an interesting conversation this morning, if that's totally fine with you. And so I shall begin. We set up, WWF set up 4 of them for to be on the panel this morning. But I think we all have 3 or 4. I think all 4 are here this morning, so that's great, fantastic. So first we are going to have, if you would allow, the young volunteers of the environment from Zimbabwe, and I think that's represented by no other than Melissa Tukudzwa. Could you come over and just have a seat right here if you don't mind, please? Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Welcome, Melissa. Yeah, please just have your headphones on so that can allow you to properly follow the conversations. Second panelist this morning, ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, allow me to welcome David Munene, who is Programs Manager at the Catholic Youth Network for the Environment, for Environmental Sustainability in Africa. David is coming in from Kenya. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for welcoming David with such a warm applause. It's pretty cold here in Baku for anyone who may be online and not sure exactly what's going on here. But we'll all wake up pretty soon and get this going. With your permission, ladies and gentlemen, and forgive me if I do not get this pronunciation right, but that does not in any way diminish the value of Kalama Mutetelenu. Thank you. I got it. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much. Actually, Mutetelenu. Great. I got it finally. She's Executive Director of the Agents for Change, and this is a youth network based in Zambia. Welcome again. Last but not the least, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Lucky Abeng. He is from Nigeria and is representing the Youth for Financing in Adaptation. That's a group funded by the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, PACJA. Please welcome him. Thank you. Great. So we all have 4 of them here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, shall I just say a few things here just so you know? Again, this panel has been put together by WWF. The overall intention here is for us to have a productive conversation around how we continue to unlock climate finance. Keep in mind this week, or the last 2 weeks, or maybe last week, and of course the entire 2 weeks during which this UNFCCC meeting, that's the UN Conference on Climate Change, is holding. Most of it is around how you scale up finance. Most of it is how you find the finance for us to be able to pay the climate bills. And as you might remember, a lot of the focus is how you get money to pay for renewable energies, for adaptation, for loss and damage. But what's going to be really of concern for us this morning is going to be how we find money to be able to pay for adaptation. You might have spoken to several NGOs. They might have told you what we're expecting is money is somewhere around the trillions. There's several figures that are floated out there. But again, we do not know whether we're going to get to that by the time we all leave here on Saturday. There is progress that has been registered in some cases with respect to the new finance goal, what is known as the NCQG, but we are not 100% sure what's going to happen. However, let's just leave that to the side and just talk about the work of these different ladies and gentlemen who are here with us this morning. You're doing some great work across the continent, from Nigeria to Kenya to Zambia and to Zimbabwe. And we're here to talk a little bit about your work. And so here's how this is going to happen. We're going to take 5 minutes each for each panelist to just talk a little bit about your work, focus on some of the things that you're working on. And after that, we're going to have a question and answer based on some of the things that you would have said. We would open it up to the audience, and then we would find a way to wrap up. We've given ourselves 1 hour for us to be able to do this. Would that be okay? Great. So to the extent that you would allow, I'd like to start with you because you're directly close to me, if that's okay with you. Do you want to just go ahead and just tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in your country? We know you're doing some fantastic work. You have 5 minutes for you to just sort of go through some of the things that you're doing so that we have got a sense. I know you're in the nature-based solution space, in the adaptation space, working with a lot of youths in your country. Talk to us in 5 minutes about what you're doing actually. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. So just like how he presented, I'm Melissa Morera from Zimbabwe. I work with young people who are into climate change, climate action, as well as the agricultural sector, but mainly focusing on agroecology, where we are working with young farmers, we have the entrepreneurs, we have those into media, and also those doing food processing, value addition. So for this, we have found out that agroecology is a technique to both adaptation and mitigation to climate change, meaning that it's a climate action where we also have a movement of young people there besides the farmers. So for this, we are supporting the small grains, which are drought resistant and which addresses the issues of context-specific problems that Africa is facing when it comes to agriculture, because in Africa we mainly rely on rain-fed agriculture. So for agroecology, it serves both for food security, there's food sovereignty, how in control are we of our own food that we're consuming, how nutritious is it. So that's what I am working on right now, to make sure that the young people are able to adapt to the climate crisis. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty fun. I just want to, oh great, I think the microphone is working. No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. So can you just, again, just speak a little bit to some of the successes that you're seeing, some of the challenges that you're seeing in the work that you're doing right now?
Okay, so for the successes, I will just start from the policy, where we are seeing the government, the policymakers making a shift towards supporting agroecology. And for now, right now, in Southern Africa, there's El Nino induced drought. We didn't receive enough rainfalls last year, and most of the crops, they couldn't get any yield, the farmers. So for this, we've been trying to make sure that the government changes their policies in terms of the agriculture, how they can support agroecology. And right now, they are moving towards that because they are now witnessing these issues of us not receiving enough rainfalls. I'm sure with Zimbabwe and Zambia, these two nations were declared the national disasters because of the droughts. So with the small grains, the farmers that we have, the small farmers, smallholder farmers that we're working with, they were able to get the yields, and right now they are even sustaining their families. So I think those are some of the successes, and also the willingness of the young people to take action and also to take a step forward when it comes to adapting to the climate crisis. But the challenges that we've been facing as the young people is the resources, especially the land. The young people, they do not have access to land, the financial resources, as well as not being in the space where decisions are being made. And also the other issue is on the inequality, where in most cases we see that the young people, we are always left behind. Even if it's in the communities, young people are not mostly included. They do not meaningfully participate in their spaces. So those are some of the challenges we've been seeing, and to an extent that young people are no longer willing to continue, most of them in the rural communities. Thank you.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was great. We'll come back to you at some point. David, if you don't mind, we can maybe just hear your experience with respect to the work that you're doing in Kenya. Talk to us about it. Who are the youths you're working with? What are some of the successes that you're seeing? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? If you'd go in a few minutes, perhaps we'll have more time for us to be able to talk, get into a question and answer. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. David Munene with the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, serving as a programs manager, but I also chair the board of the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. The work of the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, SINESA, traverses 10 countries in Africa. We started off in 2012 as an idea and got registration as an international NGO in 2014. Since then, we established a gap in the sense that Pew Research studies in 2015 showed that about 9 out of 10 people on the planet associate with some kind of faith. When we went, for example, to the UN space, we did not hear anybody talking about faith. In fact, when we made an attempt to speak about faith, the very first time we were censured and we were told the UN Charter is very clear about any inclination towards religion or anything of the sort. Now, we do know that we don't have the capacity to set up new systems, but we know that we can get into the systems that work and we will be able to change them from the inside. So we try to figure out how can we get this done. We organized our work in 3 main areas. The first one is formation and awareness creation. Previously, we used to call it education, but we realized that education has got a terminal sense to it. Somebody wants to go through several years of study, and then at one point they get a certificate. Whether they remember what they were taught in school or through the education curriculum after that, that's a different totally story. But formation is about journeying with that person for the rest of their life. It means inculcating values. It brings enculturization. It means bringing out the best in those people without necessarily trying to make them what they are. Education, without criticizing it, the usual brick and mortar education gets us all from primary school education, high school education, and puts us into an engineering class with the hope to make us, all of us, engineers of the same caliber. But formation seeks to bring out the best of who you are. The second area of our work is in networking and advocacy. Now, that is where we plugged into policy. We realized, for example, we've got an advantage. We are headquartered in Nairobi. The UNEP headquarters, which is the only Global South headquarters of the UN, is about 30 shillings or 0.025 of a dollar from the capital city to the UN. But most of the young people don't even know that it is there. I didn't know that that was actually where the UNEP was, despite sitting very many exams for about 12, 13 years and passing very many of them about the UN agencies. But I did not know that the UN was 30 shillings from the capital city. So we thought to ourselves, how can we bring in the voice of faith that is missing? Yet, almost every policy negotiator, almost every government mover, almost every corporate person, almost every young person associated with some kind of faith, because Africa is very spiritual. And I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about spirituality here. Faith is bigger than all that. So we sought accreditation, and then we realized, oh, when you get accreditation, you get a responsibility and not just a privilege. And so we started en masse bringing in young people to understand, what do these people sit in Nairobi do? Why would governments from about 193 countries seek accommodation for the entire year for their people to be stationed in Nairobi? And we wanted to engage with them. But also beyond that is to create a paradigm shift. When we are out here, ambassadors get especially in Africa, it's a sad story. The roads are cleared, they can use the wrong side, and they feel out of reach and out of touch. But if you bring them to a space where, and this is a very bad example, no records, they are sharing the same lavatory facilities with the ambassadors, then the young people feel the distance is not too much. They can exchange business cards and can change numbers. That's a paradigm shift which makes them feel closer to power and closer to their ability to influence agenda. The last area is where the rubber meets the road, is local grassroots action support. So we work with women in Rwanda, in Cameroon, in Douala specifically, in Kenya, in DRC, and youth as well in Zimbabwe and Zambia. Our work is and we have got a simple mantra: start where you are, with what you have, do what you can. If you do that, then visibility for finance will first of all spotlight on you. But you cannot just sit, come and campaign and cajole members or parties to sort of give you financing, and then you're not doing anything with what you have. So the issue of land that JV handles very, very well, they've got an agri-bioecology cultural festival, which is a wonderful, wonderful experience for culture, our ways of Africa, and food as well. But we've also partnered with our colleagues in the Pan-African Youth Networks through WWF, including Green Growth Africa, which is headquartered in Nigeria, and the AJVC. They are stationed in Cameroon, but they work mainly in the Central African region. So Green Growth Africa has developed a DG Hub, which helps us to sort of demonstrate what we are doing. So Sinesa now doesn't have to create a hub that shows what the others are, what we are doing in our work. We can just partner with Green Growth, which is a great partner of ours, and then we can showcase our work. Same case for AJVC. We don't have to organize our own corp just because a small corp because we are in DRC. AJVC can do that for us, and then we can focus on the East African region, Northern Africa region, and so on. I'd like to stop there.
Isn't that great, David? We're going to come back with some questions at some point, if that's okay with you. I'm just going to move over to Lucky, if that's okay with you. You have a microphone right next to you. You want to pick up on that microphone, Lucky. We understand you're doing some great work in Nigeria as well on the advocacy space and doing several other things. Do you want to just speak to us about that a little quick in 5 minutes before we all get out to start talking about, maybe having some questions, if that's okay?
I hope it's on, yeah?
Yes, it is
great.
on, please.
Yes. So thank you, David, for the question. So I also work with a couple of young people, not just in Nigeria alone, but across Africa. Last year we had our first inaugural session on the youth for adaptation finance in Yaoundé, Cameroon. And this particular session came because we as Africans also saw the need, and one of the top priorities we've had in the last 8 years at the COP is the priority of adaptation financing for Africa, aside the other requests for Africa to be recognized as a continent of special needs and circumstances here. So in 2023, we were able as UFAFA to bring together over 250 young persons from 35 African countries to gather in Yaoundé to really unpack these adaptation financing issues for Africa. And one of the success stories of the first edition of UFAFA was the development of what we call the Yaoundé Call, or the Yaoundé Declaration. Okay, great, thank you. The Yaoundé Declaration. Heading to COP29 in Baku, We also saw that some of our declaration to buy made its way to a couple of rooms where we had leaders, and were able to record a few success stories. Then heading to Baku, there was that need to also re-evaluate some of our declarations that went to Dubai, and we're able to bring together this time around 150 young persons from 35 African countries. We all know the challenges that we had with Baku being an expensive place to host COP, and our colleagues expressed their dissatisfaction, their inability to even access accreditation, and also funding to be here to share their pains and their request for adaptation finance. So a few of us who were privileged got the mandate as well to represent them here in Baku. And I think I would like you to permit me to read their statement that they have really sent. This is the Yaoundé call for UFAFA 2024. But before I read, we also are aware that the AGN position on adaptation financing for Africa is towards incremental adaptation, also looking at ensuring that we have grant-based financing for adaptation. And clearly, my colleagues back home have really captured this in their statement, and I'm happy to really read their statement to us today. The African Youth Forum on Adaptation Finance, UFAFA 2024, Yaoundé, Cameroon, 29th to 31st of October 2024. From the 29th to the 31st of October 2024, like I mentioned, over 150 young leaders from 35 African countries met in Yaoundé, Cameroon, for the second Forum on Adaptation Finance in Africa, UFAFA 2024. Having deliberated on the growing impact of climate change in Africa, the urgency of adapting to this impact and widening adaptation finance gap, noting the significant yet grossly underfunded role that energy assets play in building adaptive capacity and resilience in the region of Africa, concerned about the consequences of inaction on livelihoods, critical sectors and economies are highlighted by numerous reports, call out parties to the United Nations Framework Convention for putting the future of African youth in the current and future generation at greater risk, demand bold actions to address the growing adaptation needs in Africa. Recall and reaffirm the Yaoundé African Call on more than doubling adaptation finance for a resilient Africa, issued during the inaugural Youth Forum on Adaptation Finance in Africa that took place from the 16th to the 18th of November 2023, and the following demands are contained. 1. Increase the state of adaptation finance in the overall climate finance portfolio and ensure that it is commensurate with the adaptation needs and costs of African countries. Noting that even if they double overall adaptation finance to around $40 billion annually, it would still fall short of the assessed need in Africa. 2. There's need to enhance the access and delivery of adaptation finance that is grant-based and predictable by simplifying and streamlining the procedures and criteria of multilateral fund and bilateral donors, by strengthening the capacities and readiness of African institutions and stakeholders, notably frontline communities and youth and women-led initiatives. 3. The need to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of adaptation finance by promoting participatory, inclusive planning and decision-making processes, and by ensuring transparency, accountability, and learning in the implementation and evaluation of adaptation projects and programs. 4. The need to foster the innovation and scaling up of adaptation finance by supporting the development and deployment of new and emerging sources of instrument of finance, and by leveraging the private sector investment and partnership. Also, the need to enhance the coherence and coordination of adaptation finance by harmonizing the policies and standard of different funding sources and channels, and fostering regional and cross-sectoral collaboration and integration for adaptation actions. Also, The youth are calling for to ensure robust and ambitious solution-oriented outcomes on the global goal on adaptation to help accelerate adaptation action globally. And then also rallying behind the 630 campaign, which is also a campaign on access to energy. Recall that the Nairobi Declaration of the at the African Climate Summit in 2023 also noted that over 630 million persons do not have access from the continent of Africa, do not have access to clean and affordable energy access, which is also one of the 17 SDG goals. So this call also reaffirmed that there is need to mobilize funds, especially from private sector, and has to be grant-based to support access to energy in sub-Saharan Africa, seeing that we reach the 2030 agenda of the United Nations. A few demands also. The youth are demanding an increase in financing for energy access for climate adaptation in Africa. We call on developed countries to increase and prioritize climate financing for energy access projects in Africa, recognizing that energy access is essential to climate resilience. Simplify and expand access to energy finance for young African innovators. African youth have the potential to lead on the ground energy access initiative that addresses climate impact. Also, the need to support capacity building in energy and climate finance. We call for the support in equipping African youth with the technical and financial skills to implement resilient energy project, empowering the next generation of climate leaders in Africa. Also commit to a fair share of global climate finance, giving Africa's disproportionate vulnerability to climate change. Polluting nations must commit to providing a fair share of global adaptation finance to the continent with a specific focus to energy access project. This investment is crucial for achieving both adaptation and mitigation goals, ensuring that Africa's sustainable low carbon future is secured. This statement is unanimously endorsed by the participants of the second Youth Forum on Adaptation Finance in Africa that was held in Yaoundé, Cameroon from the 29th to the 31st of October 2024. The implication of this statement is the fact that if you look at Nigeria, where I'm from, the Nigerian NDC implementation framework costing, Nigeria will be needing about $263 billion annually up until 2030 to actually meet the target that we've set in our NDCs and also the target in our energy transition plan and other frameworks. 64% of the entire $263 billion that Nigeria will be needing would be channeled to adaptation planning. And within this sector, one of the things we have been able to do with the first and the second edition of UFAFA is to really make these young people understand that for Africa, need-based adaptation financing is our priority. And then we began to look at innovations from young people within Africa. We did receive a couple of exhibitions as well, and you'll be amazed at the innovation. David spoke about apps from Green Growth Africa in Nigeria and how they are also working. However, I also like the point that Melissa raised, difficulty in finance. We are now discussing the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, and across all sector, we need to see where the money is. With 64% of our NDC cost going to adaptation, where's the money as well? There is no money anywhere. But we...
if you don't mind. Sorry, Lucky.
Yep.
We're going to come back to... I'm glad you finally had the declaration out. I think that's important. Again, because this is obviously a policy-making forum, it's important to hear your voices, and I think the declaration, it's on the record, so that's a good thing.
Great.
We would come back to some of the work you're doing in Nigeria and some follow-up questions about, how you intend to move this forward in the different rooms, here in Baku and subsequently, because the work is not going to end here, isn't it? So let's hear a little bit from Mutetelenu, who is coming in from Zimbabwe. Do you want to just speak a little quickly about the work that you're doing? I know you're working with some youth groups as well. Speak to us a little bit about that. link that up to the adaptation, the need for more funding in that space, if that's okay. And then we can just maybe take a first round of questions and then open it up to the audience here. Yes, there is a huge audience here.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Mutetelenu Kalama, and I come from Zambia. I run a youth-led organization called Agents of Change Foundation that is focused on amplifying young people's voices. And so what we simply do is we train young people in basic media skills. And for these media skills, the young people then start advocating for climate change in their different spaces. Currently, we are working with about 200 young people who are running different initiatives in the country, and with support from the South, South, North, and WWF Zambia, we have been able to run this under the Voices for Just Climate Action, and we are a youth partner to that project. So some of the things that we have done is that our young people go out into communities to talk about nature-based solutions and also the need for participation from communities. We are working with rural young people who most of the times do not have the opportunity or are not given the opportunity to have such kind of knowledge or be trained in any kind of ventures that would lead them to become advocates or lead on advocacy. And so we are working in communities where we're working with these young people who are going out there to sensitize communities, firstly by using theater for development, where they go into communities, engage them on the need for them to come on board and also learn more about climate change. And the other thing that we are also doing with these young people is that we are using radio as a tool for advocacy. So once we train them in basic media skills, it is very important for these messages to be sent out there in communities. And maybe people would ask, why radio? Radio is still a big thing in Africa. It's easily accessible, and people are able to access radio. And so young people go on radio to talk about these issues ranging from nature-based solutions, adaptation, and all these issues that are discussed. They discuss these issues with traditional leaders, they discuss these issues with members of parliament and councils, everyone else who's involved as a stakeholder to these. And so these are some of the interventions that young people are working on. And my organization as well is working with young people in Zambia in mobilizing what we call the local conferences of youth on climate change and the regional conferences of youth on climate change. And recently we just held the regional conference of youth on climate change, where we brought together about 250 young people from Southern Africa and developed a youth position paper. So the young people in the Voices for Just Climate Action projects are the ones that are leading this process to ensure that other young people are engaged, their voices are amplified, and they are also able to give their opinions through the position papers that then would be developed and that they are speaking to whilst at COP here. So, and then maybe just going on to the question that you asked to say why it's important. I think it's important to have such conversations right now as youths are leading already, and this notion of saying young people are the leaders of tomorrow does not in any way, so because young people are leading today, and so these conversations are important for them. My colleague from Zimbabwe talked about, the El Nino that the southern region has been experiencing, and Zambia has been experiencing droughts, and the young people are the ones that are affected, mostly young people and women. So if we're not having these conversations, how then are we going to ensure that we create alternative livelihoods for them? How then are we going to ensure that their voices are amplified, they're given an opportunity to speak out on challenges that they are facing in their communities, and also come up with solutions that can help, the climate crisis that they are facing. So it is these voices that need to be amplified, especially the voices of rural youth, who in most of the times are not given an opportunity even to be in spaces like this for them to speak on issues that affect them, especially in the climate crisis. Thank you.
This is excellent. Thank you so much, Mutede. Um, Great. So, if you're just joining us, this is a panel discussion organized by WWF, and it is bringing together four youth working with a vast network from Zambia to Zimbabwe to Kenya and Nigeria. I think it's pretty evident based out of this first round of conversations that they strongly believe that there should be an increase in adaptation funding because they care about these issues. They work in these spaces. They know that it is important for us to increase funding in that direction. And that's a lot of what is being discussed here at the COP. Funding adaptation, funding loss and damage, but also funding renewable energy, which is pretty much what we call in the language sometimes mitigation, isn't it? And so I think it is pretty clear from the declaration that you sent out, the youth based out of your last meeting, that you're actually calling for more funding to adaptation, and it absolutely has to be grant-based and not necessarily loans. We all know that that's a significant call from most of the parties coming from the Global South, but also from Africa. So this is great. Now, I'll just ask one question, and you can all take rounds to answer that question. I know the microphone is breaking up a little bit, but after that, we would open up to the audience to ask any questions. So first and foremost, it is great that you've all said what you've said, particularly Lucky with the declaration that you had coming out of your youth gathering in Yaoundé. Yes, it is important that we look at these sources of funding coming from the outside, which is, money given rightly so by the developed parties as a result of their historic responsibility to emissions. So that's fair enough. But again, just let's now think a little bit inwardly. So it is, as you know, this is, we all know this process has been going on for a while where we're asking for these resources, but they often don't come. As they have to come, they're probably one of the most unreliable sources of income to be able to, adapt to climate change or undertake any climate change action in our parts of the world. And so the question here becomes, what are other options that we can consider internally? And how is it that you, the youth, can influence policy in a way that you can generate money internally? Because first and foremost, it's a problem for Africa, African leaders and our parties to solve this first and foremost. Yes, it's important for us to look outward, but again, what is it that we can do inwardly? So let me start with Melissa. You can all take rounds to just maybe reflect quickly about that, and then we would hand it over to the audience to ask any questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for that question. So from my own personal view, I think this also has to do with our governments, their willingness to support the budgets, where as the young people we need to be there when these budgets are being drafted. There is a CADAP framework that is an African framework, a guiding framework that says the governments must have the budget towards, I'll just say specifically for agriculture, and we all know that we need to adapt for us to be able to be climate resilient, especially in the agriculture sector, which is very important because we all need to eat, we all need to be aware of our own food systems. But so far, if I'm to tell you that maybe there are about 2 or 3 countries that have committed to set aside that funding, then it means that we as Africans, if our African leaders are not yet willing to set those finances aside for adaptation, then there's no way we are now going to expect other states or other countries or other continents to commit more if on our own we cannot be able to commit more. So it's now a matter of the willingness, the political willingness of our governments to say, per year we are going to set this amount of money which is going towards adaptation, and by so doing they can then be able to attract more investments within the countries, because it also has to do with us willingly to raise these funds, and also maybe coming up with strategies on how we as the Africans we can be able to mobilize resources, to mobilize finances within our own countries, and then we see how we can then move forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hand it over to David. Any thoughts on that, please?
We've got an excellent, thriving business environment in our countries. But one of the biggest impediments is not the law on paper, but the implementation of that actual law on the ground. I believe that it is not fair that our governments continue to shout and ask for the developed world to advance climate financing, and especially in adaptation. But then back home, we've got these draconian laws that inhibit, for example, innovative entrepreneurship that would again channel adaptation finance into our own economies. I think creating a business environment where there is a culture that businesses give back to their own countries. But this will not be achieved unless we've got systems that are ridden of corruption, systems that have got accountability. It's important for our government and our parties to ensure that there are rebates, waivers for green businesses as well that would be able to channel into adaptation financing. And lastly, our financial institutions have got to be enabled to be able to deliver on the same.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. Let us open it up to anybody who's in the audience feeling inspired to want to ask a question. Let's go with the gentleman right there, and then we will take the other gentleman right at the corner. Please, you can move my microphone around if you don't mind. Mine, except there's another one. But mine can move around. Right there, right there.
Thank you very much. I'm very much inspired by the young people from Africa taking the leadership. I'm one of those who believe that young people are leaders, whether of tomorrow or today, but I don't want to be led by people who don't know their stuff. So I'm glad you know what the issues are and you are able to discuss that. I think there is something we fail to understand in these negotiations, and that is about the trap, okay? What we call instrumentalization. That people are lured into a corner to think in certain ways, and they think that is the correct way to think. Like today we talk about polluters pay. Pay for what? What about polluters stop polluting? So that's the issue, because some of the people who do not allow you to be part of the big discussion, who quickly were able to ratify Article 6.4 for carbon credit, have got their wish. Okay, so can I ask, like my young man from Nigeria, you know that our country should be like Dubai. You know that very well. What is stopping us from being Dubai? Is it the foreign aid? Who is holding Nigeria down? That is the question we should be asking. 40 billion, like you said, given annually wouldn't solve our problem. What is that will solve our problem? That's the issue. Thank you.
David, go ahead. Just reflect over it real quick. Sorry, Lucky. Lucky, you go ahead, and we'll be closing in a few minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. It's an interesting question, what will solve our problems. And I think David responded to a couple of issues around policy. We also need to strengthen our systems. We do have weak systems in a lot of our African countries, and that is really evident in how weak our implementation of some of our climate frameworks are. And that is why with the YOFAFA thing, we are really building the capacity of young people to really call for strengthening systems. And innovative financing as well that we are doing at YOFAFA is also to look at the private sector to really ensure that their corporate social responsibility is really commensurate to what they are getting on the ground. That could be one of the sources to really get the adaptation financing that we need. I'm being told now that time is up, but I think strengthening our systems, if you compare what is happening in Dubai, like you have referenced, and what we have back home in a lot of African countries, we do have weak systems that encourages some loopholes, corruption, and all. But we do have young people who are springing up now, and the YOFA platform is one of those platforms. Thank you. happy to engage further.
Well, thank you too, Lucky. Well, this was a great conversation, and I'm really happy that we started it. Of course, the intention was not to discuss in 45 minutes and close the issues. To the extent possible, we can continue in the hallways. I guess the room might be reserved for another meeting. So let us have those conversations. The good thing is that the young people are here. I do retain two things here. Number one is, of course, that they are calling emphatically for an additional funding for adaptation. That's something that they are calling for. But I think they are also recognizing here that their advocacy effort goes beyond just asking at these conferences for us to get more money, but also to advocate internally for us to be able to have more resources from the inside, which is what they call homegrown solutions, but also advocate for better use of that money as well. I think that's also important. So that's what I retained from this conversation. I thought it was a very productive conversation, isn't it, Melissa? Thank you so much for the work you're doing. David Mutetelenu, I got it finally, and my brother Lucky from Nigeria. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, join me to want to just, thank these panelists for their great insights in the conversation this morning, if you don't mind. Please, thank you.